Meg and Justin are taking their only daughter, who is a music prodigy, up to college at Ithaca. She's 18, this is the big drive that they're taking. And there's all those mixed feelings involved, but when they're, maybe about an hour, if they're on the thruway, there's a car full of guys who kind of look like skinheads, and they're, sort of gesturing at Lily, and Meg, the main character, gets upset. And then pretty soon after that, she loses control of the car, and it spins out, goes off the highway, and sadly, spoiler alert, although it's the first chapter, her husband Justin dies in this car crash. The next chapter is 3 months later, and it's Meg and Lily, who is obviously, not taking a gap year, trying to adjust to life in their small Hudson Valley town without Justin, without this wonderful man that they both loved. And Meg has a bookstore, and she's kind of reopening the bookstore for the first time in 3 months. I chose mainly like real books to be on its shelves, and it takes place in 2022, around before Christmas. So I was kind of looking at what the big sort of sellers were at that time. My best friend from college, who lives here in my town up in Woodstock, New York, and he owns the bookstore. He co-owns it. James Conrad. The Golden Notebook. It's the best bookstore ever. And I asked him a lot about all of the technicalities of being a bookstore owner, and what it is. And the reason why I wanted her to be a bookstore owner, I started out and I was thinking of things like, Pizzagate or whatever, where these conspiracy theories, find their way into the lives of normal people. Like it's, most of them center around celebrities or politicians or whatever, who have big security details, and they're actually removed from these people and it's almost expected that people might be creating these fictions around them. But what if it was just normal people, like the pizza store owner from that conspiracy theory? And at first I was thinking, well, maybe they could, own a restaurant or an ice cream store or something like that. But I wanted something a business that people take really personally. And I can't think of anything that people take personally so much as bookstores. And, my friends, bookstore owners I know, will get hassled by people because they don't have a certain book on their shelves, or because they do have a certain book on their shelves, or where they choose to place the Bible, or where they choose, or whether they choose, there's all sorts of really deeply personal feelings that people have that are associated with books. There were people protesting the Harry Potter books when they came out for one reason or the other, and why do you have this on your shelf? It on a probably weekly or monthly basis, my friend will have conversations with customers who take affront or take personally what they've decided to stock or not stock on their shelves. So I find that fascinating. And books are, obviously, I'm a writer, I love books. And I thought, and most writers, I would say, if we weren't writers, we would love to be bookstore owners, or a lot of writers are bookstore owners. So that's really why I chose that. But in terms of creating the store, thinking about what their schedule would be like, where the books would be, I pictured my own local bookstore, and I tried to make it feel as real as possible. This is just something, to me, it's like, in my own books, I tend to write these plots that are crazy, they're just crazy, outlandish. And the whole point of writing psychological suspense is to get your reader involved on a visceral level, where they're scared and they want to know what happens next, and they're turning pages. And I find that the way to do that is to keep the relationships between the characters themselves, the day-to-day aspects of their jobs, as real and normal as possible, because that way people can find something to latch onto and relate to. So that's why I tried to make the bookstore as normal. I mean, as believable as possible. My husband wrote a movie called No Escape, and it came out in 1994, and it starred Ray Liotta, and it was a futuristic prison movie, right? And it developed a cult following over the years, and a lot of people who maybe saw it as kids, they still write to him today about this movie. The interesting thing about the movie itself is that he adapted it from a book. He was hired to write it, but he really made it into its own story. And in writing that story, he said a few things that turned out to sound almost psychic in a way. So there was, in the very beginning of a movie, there's like an incident, a military incident, and it takes place in Benghazi. And he just chose that because Benghazi sounded like an interesting name to him. This was, decade before Benghazi happened, right? It takes place in 2022. That's the year he chose, and which happens to be the year that Ray Liotta died. There are just like a few things in there. So he's gotten like emails from people. How did you know this? How do you know all this? And so I started thinking about, what if a kind of a cult formed around something like this? So the prophecy in the book, We Are Watching, is a book that Meg, the title character, the main character, wrote when she was 15 years old, and it is a fantasy book, it's almost like a wannabe Lord of the Rings type fantasy book. And she won a contest with it from a teen magazine. And as a prize in the contest, I think they printed out like 200 copies of it, and she got like $100. Just this very small little thing. The thing with Meg, though, is that her father was a progressive rock musician, and wrote some songs that some people thought were involved with Satanism, just like they would say about any, Led Zeppelin or Ozzy, whatever, but he wasn't as successful as that. So because her father was this person, there were people out there who had their eyes on him all these years. And then his 15-year-old daughter, comes out with this book. Within the confines of this fantasy that she wrote, she introduced a plague. She mentioned like the year of twos. She said a lot of things that were just a kid making things up that people out there could construe as psychic, just like they were construing No Escape as psychic. So the plague, the people in the book thought was COVID. People are wearing masks in her book, that she wrote when she was 15 in 1990. The year of twos they construed as 2022, which is when my book takes place. So they thought that, okay, there must be a satanic curse. Of course, as one would think, that's a part of this book, that her father, that has been brought down from generations, and that she not only predicted the future, she caused the future. So she's got a target on her head as a result of this book that she wrote when she was 15 years old. If that makes sense. I think gradually, the thing is like, I think it's very hard for Meg to believe that there's more than maybe one crazy person targeting her. Like, to think that the whole world is out to get you, especially since she's always considered her father to be eccentric, stoned most of the time, paranoid, and he's always said there are people out to get us, and she just rolls her eyes at that. So it takes her a little while to sort of, put two and two together, but she does start to think, my God, maybe this accident wasn't an accident, was it? So she does. So, and everything, she starts to question everything around her, and some of it turns out not to be true. So you don't know, but it's almost like that whole sense of paranoia and that whole, constant sense of fear that she's feeling is almost more dangerous than anything physically that may or may not happen to her. So yeah, she's grieving over this accident that happened recently that she blames herself for, even though it was, a malfunction of the car. But was it a malfunction of the car? Yeah, I made a really conscious decision not to write from any of the conspiracy theorists' points of view. To me, that's the kind of book I wanted it to be, like Rosemary's Baby. Like that book that's one of my favorite. I love that book. And it's told entirely through the eyes of Rosemary. And there are, snippets of things that she overhears in other rooms and blah, but it never like goes into the head of the castanets or, the people who are part of this satanic cult. It just, it dawns on you at the same time as it dawns on her. And that's the type of book I wanted to write, this very claustrophobic thing where you're just as in the dark as the main characters are. So that's a little different than some of my other books. Some of my other books have multiple, I mean, I do have multiple points of view in this book, but they're all three victims, all the points of view. Some of my other books I don't do that with. I'll go and do different points of view.